Once again, to avoid wasting your time, we're going to hop straight into the benchmarks. I'll give you my final thoughts at the end, including why am I using a 3080 12GB specifically, a 7900 XT, all of that. I've also already looked at the 4070 Ti against the 4080 and the 4090 in a separate video, so feel free to take a look at that one after this one. Anyway, why are we playing Fortnite? Well, Fortnite is being used because it's the first Unreal Engine 5 game supporting Lumen and Nanite, and this will be used in tons of AAA games coming up, so I think this makes sense to test. And right now we're looking at the 1440p Epic settings with the hardware accelerated ray tracing turned off. Lumen is kind of a software-based ray tracing, although you can hardware accelerate it to increase its quality as well as take a bit of a performance hit. Overall frame rates, we're seeing the 3080 below 60 FPS here with the 4070 Ti a bit above and the 7900 XT at 69, nice average, which is giving the 7900 XT a slight lead over the 4070 Ti. Now, when we turn on the hardware accelerated ray tracing, all of the GPUs lose a bit of performance, but the AMD GPU does lose a bit more performance relative to the other cards, not too badly, but now we're actually seeing the 7900 XT and the 4070 Ti tied in their average frame rates at 13% faster than the 3080 12GB. But if you look at the 1% lows, so if you look at the three frame rate counters, the one in the middle is the average, the one on the left is the instantaneous frame rate, the one on the right is the 1% lows, and I will note that the AMD GPU here actually has better 1% lows, although the average frame rate was a tie. Now, since none of them were delivering particularly high frame rates, I thought we'd try turning down to high settings instead of Epic, and I'm also leaving the hardware accelerated ray tracing off, so it still has Lumen just turned down to the high setting instead of Epic, so it's still using some of the software-based lighting. And here we're seeing all of the GPUs delivering a pretty good experience, with the 7900 XT 28% faster than the 3080, and the 4070 Ti 17% faster than the 3080. Also note that that does not mean that the 7900 XT is 11% faster than the 4070 Ti, since those are not being compared directly to each other, and that's something I can follow up more at the end of the video. Here I thought I'd actually test them out at 1080p, Epic with hardware RT on, meaning completely maxed out. And at these settings, I once again saw the 7900 XT and the 4070 Ti in a tie, both of them 18% faster than the 3080 12GB, although once again the 1% lows on the 7900 XT are at over 60, whereas the 4070 Ti is just a little over 50. So 7900 XT tying on average performance, but with better 1% lows. And that's been a pretty consistent thing I've seen in my Fortnite testing for the AMD GPUs versus the 4000 series Nvidia GPUs. Curious to see if that continues in other Unreal Engine 5 games. Now what we're looking at here is, what if we try to use these at 4K? They're powerful new GPUs. Well, if you try 4K completely maxed out, this is Epic settings with hardware ray tracing on, we now see the 7900 XT 9% faster than the 3080 and the 4070 Ti 12% faster than the 3080, but all of them are kind of losing here. They're all down in kind of the mid or low 30 FPS range, so not really the experience I think most people would be looking for here. And the 4070 Ti has a small lead here, but it's very small, although the 1% lows have both balanced out to 28 there. So really, if we're going to be playing Fortnite, or really Unreal Engine 5, I'm just using this to stand in here, right, at 4K, on any of these GPUs, we'd want to turn down settings. So the next thing I tried out was, what if we went down to the high settings and turned off the hardware accelerated ray tracing? Now the GPUs are all doing significantly better, but none of them are getting a 60 FPS experience. And the 4070 Ti is 13% faster than the 3080, and the 7900 XT is 17% faster than 3080, so it has a small win, although once again the 1% lows are showing a pretty noticeable lead for the 7900 XT over the 4070 Ti. Now I decided, okay, we hadn't hit 60 FPS yet, and if I turn down to the medium preset, it would turn off Lumen and Nanite, which are the features that we're trying to keep on. That's what we're testing. So instead, I decided to use upscaling. Now, this game doesn't feature FSR2 or DLSS at this time. It'll probably get added in later, but it does feature Unreal Engine's Temporal Super Resolution, TSR, which you can upscale at the quality setting, which is a 66% resolution scale. In other words, it's 1440p and then upscaling to 4K. And now all of the GPUs are delivering high frame rates, with the 7900 XT 25% faster than the 3080 12GB and the 4070 Ti not as fast. We've already moved on to Plague Tale Requiem though, so let's hop into that. We're looking at the 1440p Ultra settings here. Now I selected this game because first of all, it's one of the best looking games I have ever played. Also, it's kind of a stand-in, again, for a non-Unreal Engine next-gen game. This is a game that's not trying to support older-gen consoles. It's designed to push the PS5 and the Xbox Series consoles to their limits. And now we're seeing actually all of the GPUs, including the 3080, doing well, but the 7900 XT is actually 30% faster than the 3080, and the 4070 Ti is only 14% faster than the 3080. So the 7900 XT is actually doing really well here, and this is actually kind of an Nvidia-sponsored game, is my understanding of it. If we go up to 4K Ultra settings, the 7900 XT is now 26% faster than the 3080, and the 4070 Ti is only 9% faster than the 3080, so the 7900 XT kind of stretching its lead a little bit here, although none of them are delivering 60 FPS at 4K, which means that we might want to look at upscaling or turning down settings or both. In other words, these all struggle in demanding 4K titles. Now, I decided to use DLSS quality, but this game doesn't feature FSR. It does have a resolution scaler that had a quality setting, but given it didn't get a lot of a performance boost out of it compared to DLSS, I'm wondering if it's actually not using the same baseline resolution. It didn't state what resolution it was using. Here we're seeing the 4070 Ti 12% faster than the 3080. The 7900 XT, again, really isn't using equivalent settings. Now, all of the GPUs are delivering over 60 FPS average now. And then the 4000 series cards can use DLSS frame generation, and Plague Tale Requiem is one of the few games that has support for that at this time. And you should really watch my full video on frame generation. I actually really like it in this game, but you should be very wary of bar graphs that show frame generation frames compared to normal FPS, because they do not increase the responsiveness of the game, they actually decrease it. They add input latency in order to delay a frame to insert an AI-generated frame. I do really like it in this game, but just be aware that the frame rate numbers using frame generation should not be directly compared to normal frames. And I'm showing you the 4070 Ti against itself using frame generation there so you can see what it's able to do. Let's hop into Cyberpunk 2077 and let's start out without ray tracing. We'll look at the 1440p Ultra settings. And here, even the 3080 12GB is delivering a very good experience, well over 80 FPS in this fairly demanding bar scene, whereas the 4070 Ti is more frequently over 100 frames per second, and the 7900 XT is even faster than that. We're seeing the 4070 Ti 14% faster than the 3080, and the 7900 XT is about 28% faster than the 3080. And once again, just a reminder, that doesn't mean it's 14% faster than the 4070 Ti. Those are not being directly compared to each other. You would divide those frame rates with each other to get the direct comparison, but this is definitely a win for the 7900 XT. Also, if you're looking at the cooler numbers and all of that, I'll touch on this more at the end of the video. But since I have time here, the 4070 Ti is the Asus TUF OC model, the 7900 XT is the AMD reference design, and 3080 12GB is the Gigabyte Gaming OC. But hey, what if we turn on some ray tracing? Now, I've noticed that AMD scales differently with ray tracing depending on the type of ray tracing settings enabled. So that's why we're going to look at this in a variety of cases. We saw in Fortnite with Unreal Engine 5 that enabling ray tracing just kind of pulled it into a tie with the 4070 Ti. In Cyberpunk, if we enable the ray tracing low preset, we see a similar behavior with basically a tie between the 4070 Ti and the 7900 XT. They're 12 or 13% faster than the 3080 respectively. However, the ray tracing low settings are only enabling local shadows. You don't have any of the ray traced lighting, you don't have the ray traced sun shadows, and you don't have the ray traced reflections. So with this light ray tracing workload, the 7900 XT is able to deliver basically the same performance as the 4070 Ti. But as the ray tracing workload changes, or you're using ray tracing in a different game, you will notice the relative performance between the brands change. So here we're now looking at 1440p RT Medium. And we're seeing different results. Now the 7900 XT is actually slightly slower than the 3080 12GB, although I'd basically call it a tie. It has 96% of the performance of the 3080 12GB, whereas the 4070 Ti is still 14% faster than the 3080 12GB. So in other words, the 4070 Ti kept the same relative performance versus the 3080, whereas the 7900 XT fell back. Now the RT Medium preset is enabling, in addition to the local shadows that we already had, this now has sun shadows, and the ray traced lighting is now in the medium setting. It could also be turned up to ultra or psycho on the lighting, and we still don't have the ray traced reflections enabled. And so it's kind of interesting here that it basically drops down to slightly below 3080 12GB performance once we enable more of these ray tracing effects. Also, only the 4070 Ti is delivering close to a 60 frames per second average, with the 3080 and 7900 XT falling below that. Now, I decided to look at ray traced reflections separately to see what that did to the relative performance, since each ray tracing effect seems to be having, different impacts to the results. And now, interestingly, the 4070 Ti is now increasing its lead over the 3080 to 18% faster, whereas the 7900 XT is now decreasing its frame rate relative to the Nvidia GPUs and is now giving us 91% of the performance that the 3080 12GB is delivering. The 3080 and the 4070 Ti are both averaging significantly higher, but I mean, it's not a huge difference. They're all close to 60. I mean, the 3080 and the 7900 XT are close to 60 FPS averages, meaning you actually could use these settings on the 7900 XT. Whereas the 4070 Ti is more consistently above 60, like its 1% lows are 60, whereas the 7900 XT has 1% lows down at 44. So it's certainly a noticeably better experience now with the ray traced reflections on the 4070 Ti. Now I decided to let's just crank it. This is now the Ray Tracing Ultra preset. So this has the ray traced lighting set to the Ultra setting. It actually doesn't go all the way up to the Psycho setting. This has the local shadows, this also has the sun shadows, and it has the ray traced reflections. And now we're seeing the 4070 Ti with a 19% lead over the 3080 12GB, showing that there may be, again, some kind of advantage to the new 4000 series over the 3000 series in its ray tracing implementation. Although it's small, but it does seem to extend its lead the further the ray tracing settings get pushed. Whereas the 7900 XT is now down to 86% of the performance of the 3080 12GB, and it's down to its 1% lows down to 26, while the averages are just around the mid-30s. The 3080 is only averaging about 40 though, and the 4070 Ti is averaging a little bit below 50. So none of these are really set up well for native 1440p really high ray tracing settings, which means that we should now enable some upscaling. If we use DLSS or FSR2 at the quality settings, now all of the GPUs are delivering much better experiences. The 7900 XT is now pretty playable frame rates, although the frame rates do dip well below 60 at times. The 4070 Ti is averaging over 80 FPS now, and the 3080 is well over 60 FPS on the averages. So I think that if you're going to use heavy ray tracing at 1440p, it's looking like all three of these GPUs would be most at home upscaling in order to do that. Now, it's also important to note that FSR2 and DLSS2 do not quite deliver identical image quality, and I've done a whole video comparing FSR2 versus DLSS2 in this game in particular. The 7900 XT here is giving 87% of the 3080 performance, whereas the 4070 Ti is now 23% faster, showing that it actually seems to scale better off DLSS as well. Now, if we go to Cyberpunk 2077 4K Ultra, this is actually no ray tracing enabled at all. In this case, we're actually seeing the 7900 XT 26% faster than the 3080, and the 4070 Ti only 6% faster than the 3080. So while the 4070 Ti seems to, its architecture seems to be set up better for ray tracing and responds better to upscaling, that kind of a thing compared to the 3080, it seems like for just straight up 4K Ultra, it seems to scale worse than we've seen in a lot of our other tests. Whereas the 7900 XT, 26% faster than the 3080 12GB, is pretty typical of what we're seeing in our non-ray trace settings. It should also be mentioned that the 7900 XT is the only GPU delivering around a 60 FPS average here, just a little bit below, where the 4070 Ti is closer to 50 FPS and the 3080 only 46. So out of all of these, the 7900 XT would be the only one where you might want to just play at 4K Ultra without upscaling or turning down settings. Now, if we go down to the 4K high settings, the 3080 and the 4070 Ti are still having more trouble reaching 60 FPS, especially in this demanding bar scene at the beginning. The 4070 Ti has increased its lead over the 3080 to 10%, but that's still worse than we've seen in some of our other tests. And the 7900 XT is still about 25% faster than the 3080 12GB. So pretty similar to lead to what we saw at the 4K Ultra settings. Now, once again, we have the 7900 XT delivering us an over 60 FPS average, whereas the 3080 and the 4070 Ti are struggling a bit there. So this is suggesting that if you're thinking about using these GPUs for 4K, especially without ray tracing, maybe the 7900 XT is a better choice. Although we should also look at, we could just use upscaling. I think any of these GPUs, if you're going to be playing them at 4K in a very demanding title, it's looking like turning down settings and or upscaling, maybe even both, would actually be the way to go if you had a greater than 60 hertz 4K monitor and you wanted to take advantage of that. So in Cyberpunk, if we go down to the high setting and use DLSS or FSR on the respective brands at the quality setting, which takes a 1440p image and then upscales it to give you a 4K-like image, although there are, places where it doesn't look as good as native, for sure. Now, all of the GPUs are delivering us a fairly high refresh rate, especially for a single-player game experience, with the 3080 over 80 FPS average, the 4070 Ti over a 90 FPS average, or around a 90 FPS average, and the 7900 XT pushing at 96 FPS average. And then the 7900 XT is 19% faster than the 3080, and the 4070 Ti is 13% faster than the 3080. So overall, all of these GPUs could do well in Cyberpunk at 4K if you're willing to choose settings that fit the scenario. However, let's look at Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. We'll start out at the 1440p extreme settings. And this is not a mistake. This is consistently happening with AMD GPUs versus Nvidia GPUs. The AMD GPUs just absolutely dominate Call of Duty compared to their Nvidia counterparts. We're seeing the 7900 XT 65% faster than the 3080 12GB in this test, whereas the 4070 Ti is 25% faster than the 3080 12GB. So, the 4070 Ti is scaling better compared to the 3080 than it did in a lot of our Cyberpunk testing, but it's still nowhere near what AMD's offering is able to deliver here. Now, this is pretty interesting because a lot of people I know are competitive gamers who really just focus on one game. If Call of Duty, either Modern Warfare 2 or Warzone 2, is your jam, you spend 90% of your gaming time on this game. This is one where you might want to consider what AMD has to offer. Now, that being said, most competitive gamers don't use the extreme settings. They turn settings down. So I thought a 1440p monitor running at balanced settings would be a more realistic look at how people would play this game. And in those cases, I actually saw the 7900 XT increase its lead to 80% faster than the 3080 12GB, where the 4070 Ti also increased its lead over the 3080 12GB to 29%. But we're still seeing a massive lead for the 7900 XT here, with averages going over 260 FPS, whereas the 4070 Ti is below a 200 FPS average, and the 3080 12GB is averaging around 150, although all of them them are performing well here, and honestly, if you get killed, it's probably not the GPU's fault, but hey. Anyway, I also thought, I know that some people actually still run a 1080p monitor and reduce graphics settings if they're super into competitive scene. You might have your 300 or more hertz monitor at 1080p and buy high-end GPUs and CPUs to try to feed all the frame rate you can at that thing. So we're looking at 1080p turned down to the balance setting. Here we're seeing the 7900 XT 70% faster than the 3080, which is a bit lower than we saw at the 1440p balanced. It's possible there's a little bit of CPU limitation there. It just responded differently in this game. The 4070 Ti is 30% faster than the 3080 here. So once again, we're seeing all of the GPUs deliver high for frame rates. The 3080 still under 200 FPS, the 4070 Ti pushing close to 250, and the 7900 XT well over 300 at about 320, 325 frames per second average. So pretty crazy stuff. I also wanted to see what would happen if we just tried to max this game out at 4K. So we're looking at the 4K extreme settings to see if the 7900 XT would maintain its dominant position. It's still dominant, although its dominance is a bit reduced compared to what we saw at the lower resolutions and settings. The 7900 XT is now 59% faster than the 3080 12GB, and the 4070 Ti is now only 22% faster than the 3080 12GB. So it seems to have also slightly reduced its lead over the 3080 at this particular resolution and settings. Now, of these GPUs, they're all delivering over 60 FPS average, although the 1% lows on all three GPUs are dipping below 60 at times. The average on the 7900 XT is over 100, whereas the 4070 Ti is mid-80s and the 3080 is a little below 70. Let's switch over to Unreal Engine 4, still one of the most popular graphics engines. And the Callisto Protocol is one of the most recent and best-looking examples of Unreal Engine 4. And this is an AMD-sponsored title. However, like with many Unreal Engine 4 games, Nvidia seems to perform better here. We're seeing the 4070 Ti 24% faster than the 3080 12GB, whereas the 7900 XT is only 16% faster than the 3080 12GB at the 1440p Ultra settings. All of them have high average frame rates, though, and I think are doing well here, although all of them also have very low 1% lows. And I think that's just an issue with this game. It has, I think, very poor coding at times, and the 1% lows. Like, if you look at the frame time graph in this game, it's just all over the place. Now, this was interesting. When I turned on the ray tracing to the maximum setting at 1440p, we're now seeing the 7900 XT with a 32% lead over the 3080, and the 4070 Ti with only a 20% lead over the 3080. So the 7900 XT is winning with ray tracing. What's happening here? Well, I've tested this out on other GPUs, and what's happening here is if you look at the GPU utilization, the 4070 Ti and the 7900 XT are not being fully utilized, but the 7900 XT is being more fully utilized. So I think there's a CPU or RAM limitation happening here, or both, because the game's not programmed to take advantage of multi-threading very well. And for some reason, maybe it's due to differences in drivers or something like that, the AMD GPU is less held back by those settings, and it's able to utilize itself a little bit further in that limited situation. I think that's what's happening there. Anyway, at 4K Ultra settings, so no ray tracing, we're seeing close to a tie between the 7900 XT and 4070 Ti, but it is a bit of a loss for the 7900 XT. 7900 XT is now 16% faster than the 3080, and the 4070 Ti is now 19% faster than the 3080. So that GPU utilization issue seems to happen less at 4K, but also just less when you don't turn on ray tracing. It's really ray tracing that hits the CPU bottleneck really hard here. The GPUs are delivering decent average frame rates here, but the 1% lows, again, are all over the place. Let's hop into Forza Horizon 5, which is a very popular racing game, and at the 1440p extreme settings, we're seeing the 7900 XT only 10% faster than the 3080 12GB, and the 4070 Ti 20% faster than the 3080 12GB. Now, what's going on with that? Well, I've just noticed that AMD's 7000 series GPUs don't perform very well in this game, even relative to their previous generation 6000 series AMD counterparts. So if you see my head-to-head of like the 7900 XT and XTX versus the 6800 XT, the 7000 series underperforms in this game. Now, all of them deliver high refresh rates, so that's not really a problem, but just relative to other GPUs, they don't do super well here. If we turn it up to the 4K extreme settings, we're now seeing the 7900 XT 15% faster than the 3080 12GB, but the 4070 Ti is now 27% faster than the 3080 12GB. Once again, all of the GPUs are delivering good frame rates. Even the 3080 12GB is over an 80 FPS average, so I think all of these would be doing just fine at 4K Extreme. But the 7900 XT is certainly underperforming compared to what it has done in some of our other tests, with the 4070 Ti with a noticeable lead in this game. So let's go ahead and try out a DirectX 11 game. So God of War is programmed in DirectX 11, and I wanted to see if we saw anything unusual here. Nothing too out of the ordinary that we didn't see in any of the other tests, but the 4070 Ti is only a 10% lead over the 3080 12GB at 1440p Ultra here, whereas the 7900 XT has a 23% lead over the 3080 12GB, which is also a bit lower than what we've seen. So it might actually just be that 3080 12GB really likes this game or something, maybe decreasing the leads of the newer GPUs over the 3080 a little bit. But all of them are delivering very high refresh rate experience, all of them over 100 FPS. So I don't think you'd be unhappy playing this game on any of them. I was curious to see if we'd see a similar result at 4K settings. So if we went up to the 4K Ultra preset, we now see the 4070 Ti with only a 6% lead over the 3080 12GB. And the 7900 XT only has a 14% lead over the 3080 12GB. So once again, honestly, to me, I almost wonder if the 3080 12GB just overperforms in this game or something. Either way, they're all delivering over 70 FPS even in this actual kind of gameplay scene. The overall averages are a bit high because the cutscene's a bit easier to run than the actual game. But now Kratos holding this log is more typical of the frame rates we would see if you look at the instantaneous frame rates in actual gameplay. Now we're looking at Horizon Zero Dawn, and we're seeing the 4070 Ti only 2% faster than the 3080, and the 7900 XT is only 7% faster than the 3080. So once again, I'm wondering if this is a game where the 3080 overperforms, or if this is a game where the new generation underperforms. However you want to look at it, it is a lead for the 7900 XT, but it's kind of an unexpected result as far as the gap over the previous generation. Now, all of them, even at 4K ultimate settings here, are delivering high refresh rate experiences with averages close to 90 FPS, with the 7900 XT closer to 95. So, interesting result. Why am I comparing the 3080 to the 4070 Ti? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, I didn't think the 3070 Ti was an accurate comparison because the 3070 Ti launched at a completely different price class. Also, we could factor in inflation, or we could choose not to factor inflation. There's a lot of things to talk about here. And by the way, I'm doing the 3080 12GB model because that's simply the only 3080 that I have. But it is a few percent, anywhere from like 3 to 5% faster on average than the 3080 10GB. So that's something to take into account. Now, the 3080 10GB version launched in 2020 for $700. I'm going to blind you for a second here as I go to a white screen. And in 2020, I'm just finding I just Googled an inflation calculator, okay? And if I take $700 in 2020 and adjust it to 2022 with inflation, I'm getting a slightly over $800 result, which basically means that if we adjust for inflation, the 4070 Ti is basically the direct pricing successor to the 3080, which is why I chose to make this comparison. Rather than going by the naming scheme, I'm going by the pricing class. Now, because honestly, you can put any name you want on these GPUs, and I mean, the 4070 Ti was originally going to be called a 4080 12GB. Now, if you adjust it, now also we need to think about the percentage uplift to think about here, because I didn't test every game in existence, so I can't arrive at a true average performance uplift. Although we saw uplifts anywhere from less than 10%, which was not typical, to a more typical result of, I think, 15-ish%, even up to as high as 30% or so. So I'm going to let's start out with a 15% number, which I think is conservative and realistic as an uplift over the 3080. If we value the 3080 at $700 and multiply by 1.15, which would be increasing its price by 15%, that would arrive at basically an $800 price point, which would basically mean that you would be getting complete stagnation in performance uplift per dollar compared to the last generation. Now, I think it's also fair to say that inflation has occurred, and if we used an $800 baseline, and then, in other words, if we value this in current currency instead of 2020 dollars, then it's actually looking like we made some progress beyond stagnation. In other words, the performance per dollar would have to be $920 to reach stagnation. Now, many of the AIB partner versions of the 4070 Ti are around $900 or more, in which case it is just kind of stagnation. Although, again, most of the AIB models of the 3080 were realistically way over $700. So, I mean, guys, it's hard to say. Also, the 3080 12GB is what I actually compared it against, which didn't launch with an MSRP at all. And maybe you could call that an $800 value. You know, you got a little bit more performance, a little bit of all of that. So depending on what you compare this against, and whether or not you factor in inflation, we're either getting about the same value as a 3080 delivered performance per dollar, or I think a little bit better value, but it's not a lot better value, which means a lot of the excitement of a new GPU generation is kind of lost here when we don't get a large improvement in terms of performance per dollar, because that's the real excitement for most people of a new generation of graphics cards, is a large increase to performance at roughly the same price. And here we're getting a small increase to performance at roughly the same price, which I think is just not as exciting as most GPU launches we've seen. Now, what if we want to talk about the value comparison, to a 3080 in today's market? Well, in today's market, a 3080, really the good deals have sold out. You could find them as low as $700 to $800 for much of the year 2022, at least past the middle of the year when crypto crashed and all of that. But now if I wanted to buy one new and I'm sorting prices low to high on PC Part Picker, they're actually around $1,000. I don't know if that means maybe Nvidia's finally actually sold out a big chunk of its stock, and so that, supply versus demand, the supply is dropping, so prices go up. I don't know. If you check eBay, though, on the used market, I am seeing a buy it now price available here on a card that doesn't say it isn't working or anything like that for about $550. So if we looked at a $550 baseline versus like a 15% performance uplift for a 4070 Ti, a 4070 Ti would have to cost around $630 to match that price to performance. But again, that's a used GPU versus a new GPU, so the used GPU should definitely offer you better price to performance. But just keep that in mind, that there's a lot of used 3080s out there, and I didn't have to look very hard to find one on eBay for $550. So, something to think about if you want to risk going the used route on your graphics cards. Now, we also had the 7900 XT from AMD in this video. Now, that GPU has been widely regarded as badly priced. If we jump into PC Part Picker and we search for the 7900 XT, for some reason in 2060 shows up, but ignore that. And then when we're looking at the actual 7900 XTs, we're seeing them in stock at their MSRP of $900. Also, as of a day ago, as of the time of filming, not as of the time you see this video, because I'm filming this video when we're under review embargo for the 4070 Ti. But anyway, as of the time of filming, yesterday I saw a 7900 XT available for $880, so a little bit below its MSRP. In other words, the actual market demand seems to be showing that the 7900 XT is a bit overpriced at $900. Now, what do we think of that versus the 4070 Ti? Well, that's interesting. Okay, so if we take the 4070 Ti as an $800 product, whether that's a good deal or not, it is what it is. So what kind of performance uplift would we need to get a $900 value to make sense? So if I do 900 divided by 800, we see about a 12.5%, so let's just call it 13% more expensive. In other words, a 7900 XT costs 13% more at MSRP than a 4070 Ti. And actually, if we look at our testing, in the best case scenarios, the 7900 XT is around 13% faster. In a lot of other tests, it's 10% or less faster, and we're not even talking ray tracing yet. In some tests, I think we maybe saw it 15 or 16% faster, but those were, and then Call of Duty, I would just say that's an outlier. And if you're really into Call of Duty, you've got your value right there. Anyway, but what we're seeing here again is it's about 13% more expensive. It can deliver about 13% or maybe even 15%, depends on the game, more performance, but that's if you completely ignore anything else the 4070 Ti has going for it. If we look at ray tracing performance, then in the absolute best case scenarios, the 7900 XT is just tied with the 4070 Ti. And that's like using ray tracing low in Cyberpunk, or using Fortnite's ray tracing, which hardware accelerated version, which does not seem to be very demanding. So in light ray tracing workloads, they're basically tied. And if we go anything past that, we usually saw the 7900 XT falling noticeably behind the 4070 Ti, including if we really try to like max out ray tracing in Cyberpunk. And yes, I know Cyberpunk's particularly heavy on ray tracing, and I think it's an Nvidia sponsored title and all of that. But that being said, we did see the 4070 Ti almost 40% faster at 1440p RT Ultra settings compared to the 7900 XT. So I think the 4070 Ti is fast enough at ray tracing that if you're buying it for 1440p, you might actually use the ray tracing. And so I think that should be part of your value calculation. So in other words, the 7900 XT's price is only justified if you entirely go off the rasterized performance and don't factor in ray tracing, you don't factor in other features, like Nvidia does have frame generation, which I think is a cool feature in many single-player games, although it has drawbacks, and please watch my full video on that for my full thoughts. They're very detailed. Frame generation has problems, but I think it's overall a good feature that anyone who's interested in single-player games should not write off as a complete unusable feature or marketing gimmick. Now, AMD has said that they are working on an FSR 3, which people expect to compete with frame generation, but at what quality? Who knows? That's a hoping for something in the future that doesn't currently exist. So I don't think factoring that into your value calculation makes sense. And then in current versions of DLSS 2 versus FSR 2, I would give a slight edge to DLSS, but I think FSR 2 has caught up to the point where I don't think that's a major advantage for the 4070 Ti. But then if you do any kind of productivity, Nvidia is better supported by a lot of productivity applications, so that I think, again, for some people, but not everybody, adds value to the Nvidia GPU. So in general, overall, I would say the 7900 XT is overpriced if we're comparing MSRPs. Now, the actual market tends to adjust for that. I think we're going to see the 4070 Ti's probably end up selling for more than $800, and I think we'll end up seeing a lot of 7900 XTs continue this trend I'm already seeing of getting marked down below $900, and so I think the market will, in the end, kind of correct for that. Anyway, if I haven't mentioned already in the video, the specific cooler models I was testing here was the 3080 12GB was a Gigabyte Eagle, and I was running at its out-of-the-box settings. The 4070 Ti was the Asus TUF OC version, which has an $850 MSRP. and the 7900 XT was an AMD reference model. What do you guys think about all of this? In the comment section, let me know, and expect further comparison videos in the future. Are you guys interested in seeing the 4070 Ti head-to-head in depth against a 3070 Ti? Other specific GPUs? Let me know what you think, and stay tuned to the channel. I hope all of you have an excellent day.